Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening around the world. My name is Blackjack, and welcome back to the channel. Today is the beginning of what I want the channel to become, so I'll go through this really quick for people who have listened to it multiple times, but I've finished all of my personal decks for doing YouTube content, and now what I want the channel to be is for my viewers to leave comments below with deck ideas that I can build for you following your budget restriction, the commander you're looking for, the theme you're looking for, and any pet cards you want to include. I will put that together, I will display it, and I will go over my choices and my reasoning, and then you can use that as a good basis to put it together yourself. So, this is the very first request. This is by the BlairTwitchProject on YouTube, so thank you so much for the request. They asked for Hinata Dawn Crowned with $100 budget, no specific theme, no specific pet cards. So I was able to kind of choose my own theme, which as we talk about it is going to kind of be obvious what that is. But let's go ahead and get started. So, Hinata the Dawn Crowned, obviously we're playing blue, red, and white, and it says spells you cast cost one less for each target. Spells your opponents cast cost one more for each target. So the reason that this deck is super cool, super interesting is this is a great example. Let's look at this card called Aether Gale. It's 3 colorless and 2 blue, and it says return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hand. The cool thing with Hinata is if you have Hinata out, since you're targeting 6 things, you're actually reducing the cost by 6 mana. Now, obviously, we can't reduce the blue pips here, but we can reduce the colorless. So this essentially reads 2 blue mana, returns 6 non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So this 49-cent card is slowly getting close to the power level, at least in this deck, as it would be perhaps a Cyclonic Rift, which instead of being 49 cents would probably be $49. So, as you can see, the theme is a lot of our spells are targeting multiple things, and these cards aren't necessarily bad, but with Hinata, they become incredible. So instead of being mediocre, a lot of these cards get extremely, extremely interesting and powerful in our deck. And that's one thing that I really love about Commander is seeing people play decks and cards that otherwise wouldn't see much play or be very powerful, but in certain circumstances and certain ways that they build it, all of a sudden become extremely valuable for them, and you get to see the power of cards that you don't normally see. So I love that about this deck, and let's go ahead and kind of just go through all of the decisions. We'll go kind of section by section. So my sub-theme in this deck I went with is creatures or spells that I refer to as Army in a Can. What I mean by that is if you look at Saheeli, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you make a 1/1 servo token. I'm playing, I believe, 13 to 14 effects in this deck that all say when you cast a spell, create a token. So a lot of my creatures represent an army within themselves. As long as they can stay on the board for multiple turns alongside Hinata, you can create an overwhelming force. So the best way I would recommend playing a deck like this, if you were to build this specific one, is turn 3 you can play Hinata, hopefully if you hit mana ramp on turn 2. Turn 4 you're going to deploy one of your Army in a Can threats that you see here. And then turn 5 you're going to just start holding up interaction, whether that be ways to mess with other people's boards, other people's creatures, protect your own stuff. That's it. You're gonna just protect your army in the can, and then you're gonna interact with other people's stuff, and you're gonna slowly build and grind people out of the game with an army of 1/1s, 2/2s, what have you. So That's why all these creatures are in here. You might be wondering, where are the creatures that reduce costs of spells? I don't really play any of those. I don't think they were necessary since Hinata already reduces the cost of all of our spells by a dramatic amount. So once Hinata's out, as long as we can protect her, she pretty much does that job for us. There are a few that don't make creatures like Soulfire Grandmaster, which, by the way, is an absolute powerhouse in this deck, and so is Radiant Scroll Wielder. So these are cards that are not expensive, and you might have seen a Soulfire Grandmaster if you've been around long enough, but you've probably never seen this card. It gives your instants and sorceries lifelink, which when you're targeting every creature on the board and you're dealing between 2 and 5 damage, and there's 15 creatures, all of a sudden you're gaining 60 life, 75 life off one spell. It can put you way ahead of the curve, and really pad your life total. Not to mention, they can also, in their own way, both get you back a spell. So you can spend mana to obviously bounce back as you cast, or you can kind of get one randomly with Radiant Scroll Wielder. Sorceries. So again, a lot of these you might have seen before. Things like Curse of the Swine. It's normally a pretty good card that sees play in some decks, but in a deck like this, instead of reading invest 5 mana and you can exile 3 creatures, it just says 2 blue, as many creatures on the board as you want become 2/2 boars. And for each target, you're actually increasing the converted mana cost of this spell as well, which will be important as we go further down on the list. But Baral's expertise is what I would consider the best example of what makes Hinata really powerful. So instead of costing 3 colorless and 2 blue, Baral's expertise with Hinata out is just 2 blue mana. You can bounce 3 things, artifacts, or creatures to their owner's hands, and then you can cast the spell with CMC 4 or less without paying the mana cost. So for 2 mana, you're bouncing 3 things and casting a 4-drop. If you think about like the logistics of that, that's absolutely insane. So a card that's 49 cents and wouldn't see play really anywhere else is an absolute powerhouse of a card in a deck like this, and that's awesome. There is some card draw. I can give you my numbers really quick. I think we have 10 pieces of ramp. We have about 11 card draw spells. That might come in the form of a deep analysis. That might come in the form of recursion, like reconstruct history. That might also come in the form of slowly drawing cards as you bounce them back to your hand as you cast them, or you get to cast them out of your graveyard. It all adds up. We have, I think, 14 ways to bounce or remove creatures. So things like Aether Gale or Crackle with Power, which, if you haven't noticed, deals 5 times X damage to X target. I don't even know how to cast this card. There's so many X's in it, but I know that with Hinata out, you can probably take multiple players or creatures off the field or out of the game with a card like this. And then finally, and what I would consider the most important, we'll stop at the instant section to go over it, is protection for our own stuff. I think without Hinata on the field, this deck is really going to struggle to perform well. There's so many cards in here that go from mediocre to terrible or mediocre to fantastic, whether or not Hinata's on the field for you. So things like Apostle's Blessing, things like Counterspell, Delay, March of Swirling Mist even, Mystic Confluence, Negate, Sublime Epiphany, all these are here to protect Hinata. There's probably 2 other cards in the whole deck that you'd care about protecting, but even your army and a can creatures, the ones that we already went over, if somebody wants to kill it, that's fine. They can take it out of the game. You're not going to protect that. The only thing that you're never going to let anyone hurt is Hinata. So, a lot of X spells in the instance section, and then a lot of counters. But again, your counter spells are either to protect Hinata or to stop somebody from winning the game on the spot. Anything else in this deck you are not interacting with, you do not care about. Because more often than not, you're just going to be tapping it down every turn or bouncing it back to their hand anyway. Spells like Crush Contraband, normally already pretty good. 4 mana instant, you can exile an artifact and enchantment. In this deck, simply costs 2 mana. So, being able to pay 1 and a white to exile an artifact and enchantment at instant speed, all of a sudden, just like we've talked about multiple times, bring a card like Crush Contraband from mediocre to awesome. We'll get to the artifact section. So we have about 10 pieces of ramp. It's pretty much the same ramp package that I go for any 3-color deck that doesn't have green. You have your Arcane Signet, your Felwar Stone, your Soul Ring. You play all of the signets you can. You play all of the talismans you can. And then your Thought Vessel as your 10th piece. So this is what I would consider an easy and simple build it yourself ramp package that you could also play. The only reason that Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves are here is simply to protect Hinata. Again, that is the main win condition. That is the main engine piece of the whole thing. And for a $100 budget, without Hinata out, it is going to be really hard to win. Enchantments, this is where it gets spicy. So we have cards like Jeskai Ascendancy and Whirlwind of Thought that basically draw us cards every time we cast a spell. Already very good, but what makes Jeskai Ascendancy even better is every time you do this, you give all your creatures +1/+1. In most decks, that's incidental, but in a deck like this, if you've already deployed one of your threats and you've made 5 or 6 tokens, you've made that small army out of this, and you're giving that army +3/+3 after casting 3 spells, all of a sudden you might be able to deal enough damage to take somebody out of the game just by having this out. Finally, the 2 best cards in the deck by a country mile, Metallurgic Summoning and Shark Typhoon. So these are both enchantments that are going to create us tokens every time we cast a instant or sorcery, or for Shark Typhoon, non-creature. And the power and toughness of these tokens are going to be equal to the converted mana cost of the spell. So, with a card like Gridlock, we're going to pay 1 blue and then X, and we tap X non-land permanents. Since Hinata is reducing the cost by 1 for each target, we can technically target every non-land permanent on the board. Let's say we target a total of 12 permanents. We tap them all down, and then the converted mana cost of Gridlock, even though it cost us 1 blue mana total, is 13. So with Metallurgic or Shark Typhoon, you're going to make a 13/13 creature. You are very quickly going to be able to close a game out, making creatures of that size every time you cast these cheap spells. Finally, the land base. So BlairTwitch did mention that he was not worried about the mana base and that I did not need to include that in this deck build. I put one together as an example for you. If you were to build this deck, or if I were to put this deck together and I was on this kind of a budget, this is the land base that I would use. Keep in mind that if you did not have any lands in here, this deck would be under $100 on Card Kingdom and even cheaper on TCG, probably 75, 80. So I think this deck turned out excellent, came in well under budget, and I was able even to give a mana base if they are interested in using it. If not, I'm sure that they have the cards that they want to add on their own. But overall, I think the deck turned out awesome. BlairTwitch, thank you so much for the recommendation. I hope everybody enjoyed, and I hope maybe it gave you a little bit of inspiration to play cards like Gridlock, play cards like Reality Spasm, which in any other deck whether it's Commander or a Standard or a Modern or a Legacy, would probably never see play, but in a specific Commander-oriented theme deck like this, all of a sudden become pretty cool. So, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to more comments down below recommending me more neat decks to build. As always, Godspeed.